You're walking through the woods, and all of a sudden the trail you were just on isn't there anymore. What's your first move? Push forward a little further and see if there's a way out up ahead? Follow the sound of water, figuring it might lead to people? Or pull out your phone, stare at the map, and try to route yourself back on your own? Most people don't clock that they're lost in that first second, because in everyday life, taking a wrong turn usually isn't a big deal. Miss a turn in a city, and the next block over usually has a sign, a storefront, traffic noise, something to snap you back on course fast. That's exactly what the woods won't give you. No signs, no shops, no traffic hung to point you home. Every extra step puts more distance between you and the trail, and erases one more clue that could help someone find you. So, the real danger of getting lost usually isn't how far you wandered to begin with. It's believing you can still walk your own way back, that it feels like just one more try. But each of those tries can make the area a search team eventually has to cover a lot bigger than it needed to be. Picture an ordinary hiking trail. Broad daylight. Nothing remote about it. You're not on some survival show. You're just walking. Then a few forks in the path all look the same and you can't quite place that last turn. The instinct here is to keep moving. That patch of light up ahead looks like it could be a clearing. And that faint track on the ground looks like someone else's footpath. Neither instinct is stupid, but in the woods, looks like the answer and is the answer are two very different things. You head toward the light, and it's not a way out. You try the low ground instead. And that's not it either. You try backtracking to where you started. By the end of it, you're still fairly sure you haven't gone far from the trail. But the people who'll eventually be looking for you no longer have any way to guess where to start. In February of 1981, on Palomar Mountain in California, something happened that's still used today as a cautionary case. A 9-year-old boy named Jimmy Beveridge was camping with his family. He and his brothers went to walk a short nature trail near the campsite. Nothing long, nothing far from camp. Because the trail was so close, his parents weren't alarmed at first. Kids run ahead or lag behind all the time, that's normal. So the family searched on their own first, the brothers looked too, and after a full hour, there was still no sign of him. That's when it stopped being a family combing the area on their own. Rangers arrived. The sheriff arrived. Search and rescue arrived. Eventually, a helicopter was in the air. But the first thing the search team did wasn't send everyone charging into the trees. It was find out exactly where Jimmy had last been seen. That step can't be skipped, because a forest isn't a house you can walk through room by room. Searchers need a starting point before they can work outward from there. That means knowing where the person was last confirmed and which direction they were headed, what they were wearing, and which trail they'd been on. Jimmy was eventually found less than 2 miles from the campsite. In a city, that's a few blocks. But even with a sheriff, rangers, volunteers, and a helicopter all on it, it still took 4 days. Distance in a forest doesn't work like a straight line on a map. D. There can be a ridge, a ravine, dense trees in between, and the weather can turn without warning. You don't have to go far to become very hard to find once you're in terrain like that. So back to the moment you realize you're lost. What you need to protect isn't your pride, and it isn't the idea that you should already know the way either. It's a clear starting point. Where were you last certain of your position? What was the last landmark you passed? Which junction do you still recognize? What time were you supposed to be back? These questions sound almost too basic, but that's exactly where a search begins. If your family or a search team knows where you last were, they can work outward from there. Every extra step you take on your own blurs that starting point a little more. A Canadian outdoor safety and search prevention program lays the math out plainly. Wander 1 kilometer off your planned route, and the area someone has to search is roughly 3 square kilometers. Wander 10 kilometers off route, and that balloons to roughly 314. You don't need to memorize the numbers. Just remember the shape of it. To you, it might feel like a few hundred extra meters. To the people searching for you, it can mean an entire extra mountainside, ravines, and a lot of terrain that all looks the same. Does that mean you should never move once you realize you're lost? Not necessarily. It depends on how much you still actually know. Maybe you're confident that junction is just back the way you came. It's still daylight, and the ground underfoot is safe. Where were you last certain of your position? What was the last landmark you passed? Which junction do you still recognize? What time were you supposed to be back? That's exactly when you stop guessing your way forward. From here on, a lot of what you see is going to look like an answer without actually being one. Bright patches through the trees look like they might be a clearing. Ground sloping downward looks like it might lead somewhere. The sound of water in the distance makes you think a creek could lead you to a road, a bridge, a house. None of that is a foolish thought. It's exactly how a normal person's instincts work. The problem is, a mountain stream has no obligation to lead you out. Sometimes it just takes you somewhere lower, narrower, and harder to be seen from. Rocks along the bank are slippery, the sides can be steep, and running water is loud enough to drown out someone shouting. Follow it into a ravine, and things get worse. The tree canopy and the terrain itself can hide you completely. A helicopter can pass directly overhead and never spot you. Searchers on foot nearby might call out, and you'd never hear them. You went looking for a way out, and instead put yourself somewhere even harder to find. So this is the moment to stop chasing anything that merely looks like the answer, and instead find somewhere you're easier to be found. Does that mean you should never move once you realize you're lost? Not necessarily, it depends on how much you still actually know. Move to somewhere nearby that's safer, drier, and more open. The distinction matters here. Moving to get safe is not the same as moving to guess your way out. You can step away from an immediate hazard, but don't trade it for a spot that's just as hard to explain to a search team. Safe, dry, and visible matters far more than one more attempt at let me just check this way. Once you've actually stopped, your phone becomes far more useful. A lot of people's first move when lost is to open the map and stare at it, checking their position over and over. That instinct makes sense, but signal out here is often weak, and the battery doesn't wait around. Keep pulling up a map that won't load, and you can burn through your charge before you've solved anything. A phone earns its keep less through navigation, and more by getting a few key facts out while you've still got signal and battery. Your last known location, the route you took, where you're planning to stay put, and what color you're wearing. If nothing's getting through, conserve the battery instead. Once night falls, a little bit of light from your phone can matter more than a map that won't load in daylight ever did. Save that charge for when you actually need to call for help, light your way, or send a signal. Next, focus on being heard and seen. If you're carrying a whistle, use it instead of your voice. Fear makes people want to shout, but shouting doesn't last. Your throat and your energy both give out fast. A whistle cuts through at a higher pitch and costs you far less effort. 3 short blasts, a pause, then 3 more. Or 3 flashes of light, pause, repeat. A regular, repeating pattern of sound or light stands out far more than one person yelling at random. Searchers can tell instantly that a rhythm like that isn't just the forest making noise. If there's open ground nearby, arrange rocks, branches, or clothing into a large marker that's visible from a distance. Lay a bright jacket out flat. Leave your pack at the edge of the clearing. And don't scuff out footprints or markings on the ground. None of this looks dramatic, but each piece makes you that much easier to trace. Jimmy was only 9. He wasn't thinking about search radius, phone battery, or whether rain would wash away his tracks. What he was dealing with was fog, cold, and rain. And the most basic fear a kid can have, that everyone was just here a minute ago, and now it's just him. One of the people on that search never fully let it go. His name was Ab Taylor, a U.S. Border Patrol agent who spent 31 years doing tracking work. Jimmy was the first child in his career he wasn't able to bring home alive. What stayed with him afterward went beyond those 4 days of searching. It was an earlier moment. What if a kid who realizes they're lost doesn't try to walk their own way back? What if they stay in one fixed place instead and let the adults in the search team come to them? Would it have gone differently? So that same year in March, Ab Taylor teamed up with a writer. And together they put together a piece of search and rescue education for children. They called it simple, Hug a Tree and Survive. It sounds like a kid's book title, but it's built to solve a real problem. Children don't retain complicated instructions. Try explaining search radius, terrain reading, and heat retention to a child, and it won't stick. But tell them, if you're lost, find a tree, hug it, and don't wander off, and there's a real chance that sticks. The tree itself isn't special. What matters is that it keeps the child in one place. Applied to adults, that advice was never meant word for word. It doesn't mean hug one tree forever and never move again. What it's really telling you is, don't rush to solve being lost by walking. Stop first, somewhere safe, fixed, and findable. But stopping is only the beginning. During the day, your job is not letting your position scatter further. Once night falls, it shifts to not letting your physical condition get worse. The goal is simply making it through the night, not finding a perfect campsite. So avoid low ground that collects water, avoid gullies, and avoid standing under trees with dead branches overhead. Look for a spot that blocks some wind and isn't soaked through. A rain jacket, an emergency blanket, extra layers. Each one is a barrier between you and the wind and rain, not a comfort item. A headlamp works the same way. It lights your path, and it also makes you visible from a distance. Extra food matters less for filling you up, and more for keeping tomorrow's version of you sharp, which keeps you from making worse decisions out of cold and hunger. Fire can keep you warm and double as a signal, but it isn't right for every situation. High wind, bone-dry conditions, a local burn ban, fire you genuinely can't control, any of that changes things. Forcing it anyway can create a bigger problem than the one you started with. Being outdoors is about knowing which techniques actually apply to the ground you're standing on right now, not about memorizing as many as possible. Years later, a different story played out in Montana. In June of 2022, a 3-year-old boy named Ryker Webb went missing near his own home. The search that followed brought in a helicopter, drones, search dogs, and boats on the nearby lake. After 2 full days of searching, someone finally heard a sound near a shed on a neighboring property. They opened it up, and there was Ryker, tucked inside a lawnmower's grass catcher bag. Reports say he was found less than 2 miles from home. This case isn't proof that hiding in a shed is the answer. What it shows is this: the same less than 2 miles can turn out completely differently, depending on whether the person stayed in one place, whether that place offered any shelter, and whether anyone nearby could actually hear them. So it all comes back to that first choice. The moment you realize you're lost in the woods, the first question isn't which direction to walk. It's whether you can keep yourself somewhere you can still be found. As long as that's still true, there's a starting point on the map. And with a starting point, a search actually has somewhere to work outward from. If you're ever actually the one who's lost in the woods, don't rush to keep pushing forward. Don't chase the sound of water. And don't burn through your phone battery trying to find your own way out. Stop. Think through the last place you were sure of. If you can get back to it safely, go slowly. If you can't, find somewhere nearby that's safe, dry, and visible, and stay there. Then focus on being found. Lay bright clothing out where it can be seen. Keep your whistle within reach. Save your phone battery. Make your ground markers bigger, and stay clear of ravines and unstable terrain. None of these things looks dramatic on its own, but together they make you easier to see, easier to hear, and easier to place. Here's something you can do tonight. Before your next hike, tell someone your route and when you expect to be back. Pack a whistle, a charged headlamp, and a jacket that can actually block wind and rain. Because a lot of Lost in the Woods stories don't actually start in the woods, they start earlier. Back when nobody knew where you went.